After we divorced, my best friend said she loved me, how I struggled to preserve our friendship amid military demands. My name is Jack, and I am a 40-year-old military man who has seen more of the world than most, and more of life's hardships than I care to remember. If you looked at my life from a distance, you might see a successful career and a well-disciplined individual. However, if you looked closer, you would see the scars, both physical and emotional, that tell the true story of my journey. One constant throughout this tumultuous journey has been my best friend Sarah. Our bond, forged in the fires of youthful ambition and tempered by the trials of adult life, has been a source of strength and solace for both of us. Sarah and I met during our freshman year at college, back when the world seemed full of endless possibilities and our biggest concerns were passing exams and finding the best coffee on campus. She was an aspiring writer, her head always buried in a book or her fingers flying across the keys of her laptop as she crafted stories that were as vibrant and full of life as she was. I, on the other hand, was a latecomer to the military dream, still weighing my options and trying to soak up as much civilian life as I could before committing to a career that would take me far from the familiar. Our friendship began in the most unremarkable way, seated next to each other in an early morning psychology class that neither of us particularly enjoyed. We bonded over our shared disdain for the ungodly hour and our mutual need for black coffee to kickstart our brains. From there, our friendship blossomed. We became inseparable, spending countless hours studying together, attending parties, and sharing our deepest fears and ambitions. Sarah had a way of seeing through my tough exterior, and I found comfort in her unwavering belief in me, even when I doubted myself. When I decided to enlist, it was Sarah who encouraged me, even though she knew it meant we would see less of each other. She understood my need to serve and supported my decision wholeheartedly. Her letters, filled with mundane details of her day-to-day life and snippets of her latest stories, were a lifeline during the grueling months of basic training. They reminded me of the world outside the barracks, a world where someone cared deeply for me and believed in my potential. As the years passed, our lives took different paths, but our friendship remained constant. I married young, caught up in a whirlwind romance with a woman named Lisa. Lisa was vibrant, adventurous, and seemed to understand the demands of a military life better than anyone else I'd met. We met through mutual friends, and our connection was immediate. We were drawn to each other's intensity and the promise of adventure. Lisa and I didn't have children, partly due to the uncertainty and instability of my military career. We both agreed early on that bringing a child into such a tumultuous lifestyle wasn't fair. At first, our relationship thrived on the excitement of our shared adventures and the thrill of our romance. However, the reality of long deployments and the strain of constant separation soon took its toll. Being apart for months at a time created a distance between us that grew with each passing year. While Lisa was supportive and understanding at first, the loneliness and isolation began to wear on her. She had her own dreams and ambitions, and waiting for me to come home wasn't part of the plan she envisioned for herself. For my part, I found solace and purpose in my work, but each return home felt more alien. The woman I had married was still there, but the connection that had once bound us had frayed beyond repair. Our marriage ended in a quiet, mutual agreement. We sat down one evening after I had returned from a particularly grueling and had an honest conversation. Both of us acknowledged that we were better off apart. There were no dramatic fights or bitter accusations, just a somber understanding that our paths had diverged too far to ever converge again. The love we once shared had been eroded by time and distance, leaving behind a respectful but irrevocable separation. After the breakup, I was not sad but relieved. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden of trying to maintain a relationship that had long since lost its spark. The constant worry about Lisa's well-being and her growing dissatisfaction had been a source of constant stress. Now, with the relationship behind me, I could focus entirely on my career without the nagging guilt of leaving someone behind. It was a bittersweet freedom. I mourned the loss of what could have been but felt liberated from the constraints of a partnership that no longer fit either of us. In the aftermath, I poured myself into my work, finding solace in the structure and purpose the military provided. Yet, despite the relief, there was an underlying sense of skepticism about love and its promises. The experience left me wary, hesitant to dive into another relationship that might end the same way. I became more guarded, cautious of letting anyone get too close, fearing the same cycle of excitement, distance, and eventual disintegration. Through all this, Sarah remained a constant in my life. She was the one person I could confide in, the one who knew me better than anyone else. She listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding as I navigated the emotional aftermath of my divorce. Our friendship was a safe harbor, a place where I could be vulnerable without fear. Little did I know that this unwavering bond would soon be tested in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to have found her own fairy tale. she married Mark, a fellow writer she met at a literary workshop. Mark was charming, witty, and seemed to understand Sarah's passion for storytelling better than anyone else. Their wedding was a picturesque event, celebrated in a garden, surrounded by friends and family. They settled into a cozy home filled with books, laughter, and the promise of a happily ever after. They had 3 beautiful children, and their life seemed like the perfect story Sarah had always dreamed of writing. But as the years went by, the cracks in their perfect facade began to show. It started subtly, with Mark's criticisms about Sarah's writing and parenting choices. He would dismiss her stories as trivial and question her children, undermining her confidence at every turn. His charming exterior masked a cruel and controlling nature that slowly eroded Sarah's spirit. Late one night, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice trembled as she confided in me the true extent of her suffering. Mark had become a tyrant, subjecting her and the children to emotional and physical abuse. He belittled her dreams, calling her writing worthless, and accusing her of being a terrible mother. He isolated her from friends and family, making her feel alone and trapped in her own home. Sarah described nights filled with fear, where Mark's temper would flare over the smallest perceived slight. He would yell and throw things, his rage unpredictable and terrifying. The children would hide in their rooms, scared and confused, while Sarah tried to shield them from the worst of it. She spoke of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and a heart weighed down by constant dread. Mark's control was absolute. He monitored her phone calls, restricted her movements, and ensured she had no access to money or resources to escape. The breaking point came when Mark's abuse escalated to a physical assault that left Sarah with a broken rib and a resolve to protect her children at all costs. She described the night she gathered the courage to leave, sneaking out in the dead of night with her kids, a few essential belongings, and the hope of finding safety. She found refuge in a shelter for abused women, where she finally felt a semblance of security. The divorce that followed was a brutal and painful process. Mark fought for custody, using every tactic to intimidate and manipulate Sarah. The legal battles were long and exhausting, draining her both financially and emotionally. Despite the scars, both visible and hidden, Sarah emerged from the ordeal determined to rebuild her life for the sake of her children. As she told me her story, I felt a deep sorrow for her. Sarah had always been strong and resilient, but this experience had left her vulnerable and broken. I remembered the vibrant, passionate woman I had fallen for in college, and it pained me to see her so worn down. My heart ached for her and her children, who had endured so much pain at the hands of a man who should have cherished them. Sarah's depression was palpable. She spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by memories of Mark's cruelty, and days where the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. Her once bright eyes were now shadowed with sadness, and the spark of creativity that had defined her seemed dimmed. She expressed a profound loneliness, a need for love and support from those around her. She felt lost and overwhelmed, struggling to navigate a new reality without the safety net of her former life. I found myself feeling not just sorry for Sarah, but a deep sense of responsibility and a renewed surge of the feelings I had once harbored for her. She needed more than just a friend. She needed someone who could offer her the love and security that had been so cruelly stripped away. I wanted to be that person for her, to help her heal and rebuild her life, but the complexities of our situations made it difficult. Sarah's story reignited a protectiveness within me. I wanted to be there for her, to provide the emotional support she so desperately needed. I felt a fierce determination to help her find her way back to the vibrant, strong woman she had once been. Yet the constraints of my military life and her obligations as a mother made the path ahead uncertain and fraught with challenges. As I sat in my quarters, reflecting on everything Sarah had endured, I knew that our bond was more important than ever. She needed to know she wasn't alone, that someone cared deeply for her and her children. I vowed to support her in any way I could, even if it meant putting my own feelings aside. Sarah deserved happiness and love, and I was determined to help her find it, no matter how long it took or how difficult the journey might be. The day I received Sarah's call, detailing the horrific reality of her marriage and subsequent divorce, I knew I had to see her. It was impossible to offer her the support she needed over the phone. I needed to be there, in person, to provide any comfort and strength I could. I took leave from my duties, something I rarely did, because this was too important. The anticipation of seeing Sarah again, under such dire circumstances, filled me with a mixture of anxiety and determination. As I packed my bags, I was flooded with memories of our time together in college. I remembered the countless nights we stayed up talking, the coffee dates, and the unspoken bond that had always existed between us. I was anxious about seeing her, knowing the pain she had endured and the scars it had left. Yet I was also filled with a sense of purpose. Sarah needed me, and I was determined to be there for her. The journey to her home state felt like an eternity. I replayed our conversations in my mind, trying to prepare myself for what I might find I was worried about her, about the toll the abuse and the divorce had taken on her and the kids. As the plane touched down, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional reunion. I arrived at her house in the early afternoon. It was a modest, cozy place, much like the home she had described to me in her letters and phone calls. As I approached the door, my heart raced. I rang the bell, and within moments, the door swung open. There she stood, Sarah. Looking both familiar and heartbreakingly different. She looked tired, worn down by the struggles she had faced. Her once vibrant eyes were now shadowed with a sadness that cut me to the core. Yet there was still a spark of the Sarah I knew, the strength and resilience that had always defined her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a casual outfit, but there was an elegance to her that no amount of hardship could diminish. "Jack," she said, her voice a mix of relief and emotion. We stood there for a moment, just taking each other in, before she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly, feeling the weight of everything she had been through in the way she clung to me. We spent the first few hours catching up, easing into more light-hearted topics. We reminisced about our college days, laughing at old memories and the silly things we used to do. It was comforting to slip back into that familiar rhythm, to remember the carefree days when our biggest concerns were exams and weekend plans. But as the day turned into evening, the conversation naturally shifted to more serious topics. Sarah opened up about the extent of the abuse she had endured. She told me about the nights filled with fear, the constant belittlement, and the physical violence that had become a part of her daily life. Her voice trembled as she recounted these experiences, and I could see the pain etched into her features. I felt so trapped, Jack, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. There were days when I thought I wouldn't make it through, but I had to stay strong. For the kids, they needed me. I listened, my heart breaking for her. I wanted to reach out and hold her, to take away all her pain, but I knew there was only so much I could do. Still, being there, listening, and offering my support felt like a small step in the right direction. Over the next few days, we fell into a comfortable routine. We would spend the mornings talking, sharing coffee, and helping her with whatever tasks needed to be done around the house. Afternoons were spent with her kids, who were slowly starting to open up to me. Evenings were a time for reflection, where Sarah and I would sit on her porch, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the peace of each other's company. It was during one of these quiet evenings that the atmosphere began to shift. We had been talking about our college days, laughing at some of the antics we got up to, when Sarah's expression grew more serious. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly, and I could sense there was something she wanted to say, but was struggling to find the words. "Jack," she began, her voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you." I turned to her, giving her my full attention. "What is it, Sarah?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of hope and fear. "I love you, Jack. I always have." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. I could see the tears streaming down her face, the raw emotion in her eyes. My mind raced, trying to process what she had just said. In another life, under different circumstances, her confession might have been the beginning of a beautiful new chapter, but the reality of our situations made things far more complicated. "Sarah," I said softly, reaching out to take her hand, "I care about you so much. You mean the world to me. But you've been through so much, and I'm not sure this is the right time for you to make such a decision." She looked at me, a mixture of desperation and longing in her eyes. "I know it's a lot, Jack, but I've never been more certain of anything. You've always been there for me, and I can't imagine my life without you." I squeezed her hand gently. "I understand, but you need to take time to heal. You've been hurt so badly, and I don't want you to make a decision based on your need for comfort right now. You deserve more than that. You deserve a relationship that's built on more than just the aftermath of pain." She nodded slowly, tears still falling. "I just don't want to be alone. I need someone to be there for me, to protect me. I will always be here for you, Sarah, I promised. But we need to take this slow. Let's focus on helping you and the kids heal first. We can talk about us when you're in a better place." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again, a hint of a smile breaking through her tears. "Okay, Jack, I trust you." We sat there for a while longer, holding hands and watching the stars come out. The tension that had built up over the past few days seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of understanding and mutual respect. We knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but we also knew that we would face it together, no matter what. As my visit drew to a close, the reality of our separation began to set in. We spent our last day together, trying to make the most of our time, but there was an unspoken sadness between us. When it was finally time for me to leave, we stood on her porch, holding each other tightly. Take care of yourself, Sarah, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And take care of those kids. You're stronger than you know. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I will, Jack, and you take care of yourself too. Come back to us when you can. I will, I promised. Pulling her into one last hug. I'll be in touch. We'll get through this, I promise. As I walked away, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, hope, and a determination to do whatever I could to support Sarah from afar. Our friendship had always been a source of strength for both of us, and I knew that no matter what the future held, we would find a way to navigate it together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Sarah in my life, I knew I could face whatever came next. Returning to my base, I found myself consumed by thoughts of Sarah and the impossible situation we found ourselves in. The days were long and filled with routine duties, but my mind was constantly drifting back to the moments we shared during my visit. The sound of her laughter, the touch of her hand, and the weight of her confession played on a loop in my head. I had hoped that seeing her would bring clarity, but instead, it had only intensified my confusion and worry. Our conversations, once easy and light, became strained as we navigated the new dynamic between us. In the past, we had been able to talk about anything and everything without hesitation. Now every word felt loaded with unspoken emotions and unresolved issues. I could sense the tension in her voice during our phone calls, and I knew she felt the same. From my end, I tried to explain the complexities of my life to her, hoping she would understand the barriers that stood between us. Sarah, my life is unpredictable, I told her one evening, pacing the small confines of my quarters. The constant relocations, the secrecy of my missions, and the ever-present danger. It's not a life I would wish on anyone, especially not someone I care about as much as I care about you. She listened quietly, her silence a stark contrast to the lively exchanges we once had. I understand, Jack, she said finally, her voice soft, but at least I get to see you a bit, and if it was for even a year or two, I'd be okay. Her words broke my heart, because I knew she was speaking from a place of deep loneliness and a desperate need for safety and love. She had endured so much, and I wanted nothing more than to be the one to make it all better. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't provide the stability and security she and her children needed. Sarah, you deserve more than I can offer, I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. You need someone who can be there for you and the kids. Someone who can provide the kind of stability you all need. But I don't care about stability right now, Jack, she replied, her voice rising with frustration. I just want to feel safe and loved. I just want to be with you. The desperation in her voice was palpable, and it tore at my heart. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I wished for nothing more than to be with her. But the reality of our situations made that impossible. I couldn't ask her to live a life of uncertainty and fear, constantly wondering where I was and if I would come back. As the days turned into weeks, our communications dwindled to quick "how are you" messages, neither of us knowing how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. The easy rapport we once had was replaced by a strained politeness, and every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. We both avoided the elephant in the room, the unspoken feelings that had complicated our friendship. The distance, both physical and emotional, grew, and I feared that I was losing my best friend. The woman who had pulled me out of some of my darkest moments was now the source of my greatest inner turmoil. I missed the simplicity of our old conversations, the way we could talk for hours about everything and nothing. Now, every interaction was tinged with the weight of what we weren't saying. In the quiet moments, when I was alone in my quarters, I would replay our conversations in my mind, trying to find a way to make things right. I knew she was struggling too, dealing with the aftermath of her divorce and trying to rebuild her life for the sake of her children. I wanted to be there for her, to support her in any way I could, but the limitations of my career made that almost impossible. The guilt of not being able to give her what she needed weighed heavily on me. I had always been the one she could rely on, the one who was there for her, no matter what. Now, I felt like I was failing her when she needed me the most. It was a cruel twist of fate, that the one time she needed me to be present and stable, I was more transient and unpredictable than ever. I began to fear that our friendship might not survive this test. The thought of losing Sarah, the one person who truly understood me, was almost too much to bear. She had been my anchor through so many storms, and now I felt adrift without her. I clung to the hope that we would find a way to navigate this new terrain, but with each passing day, that hope seemed to slip further away. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I sat down to write her a letter. I poured my heart into it, trying to explain how much she meant to me, and how desperately I wanted to find a way to be there for her. I told her about the guilt, and the fear, the longing and the hope, but as I read it over, I realized that words alone wouldn't be enough to bridge the gap between us. The complexities of our lives required more than heartfelt letters and late-night phone calls. Despite the challenges, I knew I couldn't give up on our friendship. Sarah was too important to me. I resolved to keep trying, to find a way to support her, even from a distance. I reminded myself that true friendship could withstand even the most daunting obstacles, and I clung to that belief as I faced each new day. As the weeks turned into months, we both adjusted to our new normal. Our conversations, though still strained, became more frequent as we found a way to navigate the complexities of our feelings. We learned to focus on the positives, to cherish the moments we could share, even if they were few and far between. Slowly, the tension began to ease, and the warmth of our old friendship started to return. I continued to remind Sarah that she deserved the best, that she needed to focus on healing and providing a stable environment for her children. She began to see a therapist, something I had encouraged from the beginning, and I could hear the difference it made in her voice. She sounded stronger, more hopeful, and that gave me a sense of peace. Our friendship, though tested by fire, emerged stronger. We both understood that the love and respect we had for each other were worth fighting for. We learned to accept the limitations of our circumstances and to appreciate the connection that had sustained us through so many trials. In the end, it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. We had each other, even if from a distance, and that was a comfort neither of us could take for granted. Our bond, forged in the fires of youth and tempered by the trials of adulthood, proved resilient and enduring, and as we faced the uncertain future, we did so with the knowledge that we could weather any storm as long as we had each other. Update. There are some things I left out of my previous recounting, and I feel it's important to address them to provide a clearer picture of my situation and the feelings involved. Do you love her or not? Yes, I love Sarah, not just as a friend, but deeply and profoundly. She is the only person I can truly open up to, sharing my most vulnerable feelings without fear of judgment. When we first met, I developed feelings for her almost immediately and fell hard. I remember the day I confessed my feelings to her vividly. She gently told me she had a boyfriend who later became her husband and now ex-husband. Heartbroken, I backed off, and for a couple of years, we didn't speak. Life went on, but those feelings never completely faded. Looking back, I often wonder how different my life might have been if we had gotten together back then. I think I would have been much happier, and perhaps she would have been spared some of the pain she endured in her marriage. Bro, you're 40. Aren't you retiring from the military? I joined the military later than most, which means I still have some years left before I can retire. I recently re-upped and have another 5 years on my current contract. For those who are curious, I'm trying to stay as anonymous as possible, so I won't disclose my branch of service. The military has been my life for so long, and while it has its rewards, it also brings with it a significant number of challenges, especially when it comes to personal relationships. How do you ever expect to have a relationship, given your situation? The issues surrounding a potential relationship with Sarah are incredibly complicated. She just got divorced and has alimony and child support to consider. Additionally, she is barred from cohabitation and cannot leave her home state due to custody arrangements. If these restrictions weren't in place, it might be easier for us to consider a future together. I could potentially move her and her kids to wherever I'm stationed stateside, but even then, the unpredictable nature of my job means I'd often have to leave her and the children behind, creating a life of uncertainty. Especially with her wounds still fresh, I don't want to add to her stress or make her life more complicated. The lifestyle of a military man is not easy for most women to accept. There are long deployments, missed holidays, and the constant risk associated with my job. While there are women within the military community who understand this, forming a relationship within the same environment brings its own set of challenges and complications. I call BS. This isn't real because XYZ. Believe what you will, but this is my reality. One of my biggest fears is something happening to me, and Sarah not being informed. I have no immediate family left. My parents passed away, and my brother recently died. If something were to happen to me, Sarah might not be notified, because we wouldn't be able to marry until her alimony runs out. While I could use the "it's classified" excuse to avoid lying about my whereabouts, I still feel that withholding information would be a betrayal of her trust. When I went to visit Sarah, I might have overdone it. I wanted to make her feel special and appreciate it after everything she had been through. Her ex-husband treated her so horribly, and I felt she deserved to be taken out and treated well. I took her to nice restaurants, bought her thoughtful gifts, and we spent a lot of time together. I wanted to show her that she deserved to be loved and cherished, but in doing so, I might have sent mixed signals. During my visit, we ended up hooking up. It was a moment of weakness on my part, and while I don't regret being with her, I regret the emotional turmoil it caused her. We had been caught up in the moment, and it felt right at the time. Sarah later told me she had expected it to happen, and that she enjoyed every moment. However, she didn't anticipate how it would make her feel afterwards. She repeatedly assured me that she doesn't normally do things like this, but she felt completely safe with me, and it was a very special experience for her. In hindsight, I realized that not restraining myself contributed to her emotional pain. We talked about it, and she said it was fine, but I could see the lingering effects it had on her. She felt even more attached and conflicted, and I hated myself for being part of the reason she was hurting. Sarah deserved someone who could be there for her fully, someone who could offer stability and support, and I wasn't in a position to provide that. Since returning to my base, I've tried to maintain our friendship, but it's been challenging. Our conversations, once easy and natural, have become strained and awkward. The dynamic between us has shifted, and I fear that we may never get back to where we were. The woman who has been my rock and my confidant is now the source of my greatest inner turmoil. I feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect her, but I am limited by my circumstances. As time goes on, I hope that Sarah finds the peace and stability she deserves. I will always be there for her, even if it's from a distance. Our bond is strong, and I believe it can withstand even this. But for now, I must focus on my duties, and trust that we will find a way to navigate this complex and challenging situation together.